spirituality. I'm Emily Vartanian-Tuttle, the founder of Pause and Purpose, located right across the street from the library. A lot of you are already a part of the community, but for those of you who don't yet know us, I'd like to warmly welcome you tonight. We're a spiritual gathering space for meditation, yoga, breathwork, healing workouts, qigong, and so much more. We're built on the idea that whole person well-being encompasses more than just fitness and relaxation. It's about connecting to others. In every class, we open the circle for discussion and hold space for people to share their journeys with others. Slowly, we begin to see members build up a reliable support team of like-minded friends and cultivate their own version of the good life for themselves. The Westport Library graciously invites us here every month to share mindfulness events with our beautiful town through our self-checkout series. I'm so excited to host Dr. Miller tonight and share her important work intimately with all of you. I feel so personally connected to Lisa and her research. In the past, we both went through challenges surrounding motherhood, and we both found unprecedented support and awakening through gathering spiritually with others. It inspired her to study the phenomena behind the positive changes she was experiencing, and it inspired me to create Pause and Purpose so that other people could feel this too. In her work, we found immense value. It gives us language and deeper understanding of our interconnectedness. It helps us to succinctly explain the rituals that transform so many lives at Pause and Purpose. It deepens our own practices and adds context to what we already feel, that gathering with others in spiritual connection is a powerful ingredient for a life well lived. I'm so excited for you to experience this presentation tonight. Thank you, Lisa, for creating healing from your own struggles and triumphs, doing the research, and spreading the word to improve lives. I'm proud to introduce Dr. Lisa Miller, founder of the Spirituality and Mind-Body Institute at Columbia, New York Times bestselling author, and newest member of our community here at Pause and Purpose. I hope you enjoy this enlightening evening and may it inspire you on your own healing journey. Thank you so much. Also, they'd just like me to add that if you'd like a question, we have mics over here. Thanks, Lisa.
Hello, thank you for coming. I will share with you that I just got over 3 weeks of surgery, so I'm barefoot. But it felt apropos because we're celebrating Pause and Purpose, where you do so many extraordinary mind, body, spirit practices. I want to thank you for what you've created at Pause and Purpose. It is exactly what our community needs. This is a community full of creative, soulful, curious, thoughtful, bright people, and to have a hub, a catalytic hub, where we might come together and share of the heart is exactly across faith traditions and across generations and across other areas that normally divide us in common purpose. So yes, it is our purpose that we find, but it's also the common purpose of our human journey, I would call our spiritual quest. So thank you. So I am here today to talk about spirituality. I am a scientist of 25 years at Columbia University, during which time I started the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute. I also am a parent. And being here in Westport, sharing this with you, is really a highlight in my journey. My children were raised in this library, and my children were raised along with some of your children in this library. So it's a particular joy to be here together now. May we start with a practice. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes and in your inner chamber, take 5 breaths to clear out your inner space. In your inner chamber, I invite you to set before you a table. This is your table. And to your table, you may invite anyone, living or deceased who truly has your best interest in mind? Anyone living or deceased who truly has your best interest in mind? And with them all sitting there, ask them if they love you. And now you may invite your higher self, the part of you that is so much more than anything you may have or not have, anything you may have done or not done, your true, eternal, higher self. And ask you if you love you. And now finally, you may invite your higher power, however you know, whatever your word may be, your higher power, and ask if they love you. And now with all of these people sitting here right now, what do they need to share? What do you need to know? What do they need to tell you now? And when you're ready, I'll invite you back. This is your counsel, and they are always there for you. Who shows up may change depending on where we are in our journey, and we can ask what is on our heart at that time. This is your birthright. This is your innate capacity for transcendent relationship to the higher power, the deep love with those who truly have your best interest in mind, and your true essence, your true higher self. This is what I call your awakened brain. So, how many people here would consider yourself to be spiritual? How many people would consider yourself to be spiritual and at least somewhat religious? How many people here would consider yourself to be on a quest? This is your birthright. If you ask a clinical scientist, hey, what's the difference between spirituality and religion? A scientist could point you to a twin study. A twin study looks at twins raised together, twins raised apart, and factors out commonality as a function of genes and environment. So, temperament. Whether we are tightly wound or laid back, whether we might be introverted or extroverted, temperament is half innate, half environmentally formed. IQ is 60% innate, 40% environmentally formed. The capacity to experience spiritual life, and more specifically, to engage what you just did, your awakened brain, in a transcendent relationship, is 1/3 innate. All around the world, every single one of us is born with the inborn neural capacity to share what we just shared. There is one spiritual brain, and we all have it. Now, of course, there is human variability, and we can strengthen components. But what you just did was to engage in the deeper nature of life. And the very same circuits in our brain, neurodocking station, through which we may experience our relationship to the higher power, whether we say Hashem, Allah, God, Spirit, Force, Source, in and through nature, universe, whatever our understanding of the deeper force of life may be, that is the same neurodocking station through which we experience that ultimate love towards one another, transcendence and immanence towards one another. And the two go hand in hand. So what does that have to do with the type of deep journey that each and every one of us is on? Well, it turns out that if you look across the regions of the awakened brain, those broad and pervasive regions in red, this was published in JAMA Psychiatry in 2014, we found that sustained engagement of our awakened brain, what you just did, whether it is through meditation or spiritual mind-body practice or prayer or relationship in and through nature or service, transcendence or immanence, over 8 years led to cortical thickening across the regions of the awakened brain, which means that if you choose to walk the walk and talk the walk and live into your spiritual path, over time there is literally a thickening, a strengthening of processing power across regions of perception, reflection, and orientation. With 80% overlap, these regions are not thick, but thin in people who suffer from recurrent major depression. What does that mean? It means that when you choose to practice your spiritual life, when you're on a quest, day in and day out, we don't need to be perfect, we don't need to do it 80% or 90%, it is a stance in living. There is a change in our brain through which our increased day in and day out spiritual quest, our awakening, becomes neuroprotective when what we want is not what we get, or when what we get is very much not what we want. Which brings us to the next practice. I invite you to take 5 breaths, clear out your inner space. I invite you to locate a time where you did everything right. I mean, you wanted that red door. You wanted that red door so badly, so you researched it, and tactically you had a plan. 99% that red door was yours. It could have been him, her, them to say yes. It could have been that job, that promotion, that school, that place to live, all lined up. That was yours. And you reach for your red door having known it was yours, grab the handle, but it's stuck. And you can't believe it's stuck because you had done everything right. A plus B plus C. 99% in the bag. It was stuck. You might kick the door. You might be shocked, enraged, in time perhaps even depressed. But because that red door was stuck, you had no choice. You pivoted. You might have pivoted 20 degrees, 40 degrees, 110 degrees, and over there was a wide open yellow door. A radiant, wide open yellow door. You might have said you didn't know of yellow doors, those don't exist. And on the other side was someone more right for you that felt like a soulmate. It was a community where you finally felt a deep sense of belonging. It was a job with a mentor who saw you as you'd never seen yourself. Through that yellow door, that was not what you had wanted. That was better. Better and better for you. So as you think now of that stuck red door and the hairpin turn that led to the wide open yellow door that has everything to do with who you are and where you are today, was there anyone standing at that hairpin turn who maybe pointed you in some way to the yellow door, told you a story, gave you a bit of information? It could have been someone you met for 2 minutes at the coffee shop. Or it could have been someone for years, a grandparent, a friend who told you a story for the first time. They were a trail angel at your hairpin turn. And as you step back now and you look at your stuck red door, hairpin turn, trail angel, and wide open yellow door that has everything to do with who you are and where you are today. How really are the most important parts of our lives found? Is it narrowly through strategy and tactics and planning and research? Sure, that matters. Sure, we need to be prepared and ready. And the deeper nature of life, is it really one given to radical control? Or is there more a dialogue with the deeper force in life? Are we less radically makers of our path and more discoverers of our journey? So finally, way back, stuck red door, hairpin turn, trail angel, and wide open yellow door. Where in your road of life is your higher power? The force or source in and through life. The universe, Hashem, God, Jesus, Allah, where is the source of your transcendent relationship in your path? Is your higher power in the wide open yellow door and the stuck red door? Is your higher power in the trail angel and your capacity to be an open system in dialogue with the trail angel? Might it be that you have been on a spiritual path all along? Might it be that everyone in the room has been on a quest? That, if I might invite you back, is your awakened brain. This is your birthright, and it is a stance in living through which this understanding of human lived spirituality is not a belief, it is a seat of perception. Our deep innate capacity for a dynamic relationship with the transcendent and its presence in the immanent, our dynamic relationship to the higher power, and that love as we turn to one another, human beings, in community, in fellowship, in common cause and purpose, in faith communities, the Sangha, the Minyan. This is how we're built. So what else does science say as we move between epistemologies, ways of knowing? Every one of us is a logician and an empiricist. Every one of us is a mystic and an intuitive. We all have a helpful skeptic. And all forms of knowing are our birthright. These are organic epistemologies with which we are all capable. When we engage our awakened brain, we may have a realization. It might be a mystical experience. It might be a synchronicity, a guiding experience, where two unrelated physical events clearly have a deeper meaning, a direction. Whether it is prayer or meditation, whatever mind, body, spirit practice it may be, we are engaging our awakened brain. And the capacity to bring that breakthrough, that realization, into dialogue with discernment, the logician, with curiosity, not the skeptic who pretends that they're a bouncer at the door, but the skeptic who says, wow, what? Is our capacity to engage multiple ways of knowing. When we do, we have a more highly interconnected brain. We look at people who tend to ask a question of their head and receive a knowing of the heart or a mystical experience. People who may have a profound transcendent experience and then discern over time its meaning. And we see a more highly interconnected brain between regions, which is the hallmark of an innovative, creative brain. Yes, in our work, but more importantly in our lives. That our lives are a creative act amongst you creative Westport people. You have a highly interconnected brain. So who here would say you use at least 3 forms of knowing a day? Empiricism, logic, mysticism, intuition, skepticism. Yes, yes. And can they speak to each other? Yes. And that is the quest. A quest is a stance. It's not somewhere I'm going, and it's not some location to which I arrive. Quest is a deep stance, leaning into life. What is life showing me now? Now, why is this important? Because 40 years ago, in the good attempt to be inclusive, we threw most talk of spirituality and religion out of the public square. Do you remember that? It was an attempt to be inclusive. Take down the Christmas tree, no talking about this in public, right? Well, we actually became radically exclusive. We threw the spiritual baby out with the bathwater and had a stone-cold ice age for 40 years, in which it was very unlikely at a party or a dinner or a boardroom or in a classroom for someone to speak from their heart in the first person about their spiritual life. Which is why what you are doing and what you are doing here now in community is so extraordinarily important to the renewal of our society. With becoming spiritually non-conversant, 40 years, well, that's long enough for someone to have a baby who grows up, who's now 18, 25, and has never lived in a culture where in the air and water was an implicit sense of transcendent relationship that we just shared here. With the atrophy of what we now know as the spiritual core of the whole person, with the atrophy of an attenuation of family spiritual life with or without religion, faith observance, the many ways in, there has been a statistically related concomitant skyrocketing in the diseases of despair. This affects us in every decade of life, but it is most egregious in the 18 through 25-year-olds, where the rate of death by suicide now rivals the rate of death by auto accident as the #1 killer of youth. So as parents, how do we help them? We help them by opening our own spiritual heart and our own spiritual journey. We help them by walking up by their side as they grow and expand in their birthright, 1/3 innate, 2/3 environmentally formed. And we help them by speaking to one another, Sangha, Minyan, pause and purpose, faith community, in a way that looks at one another as a soul on earth, a being of infinite worth, a child of God, the higher power. That is a way of being. Not all forms of social support are the same. Okay? It is a crisis. It is our #1 public health crisis. An 18 through 25-year-old is not likely to die of cancer or COVID or even auto accident compared to suicide. So how do we get ahead of this, right? This is our cultural tidal wave. So I'll share with you that in well-resourced communities, such as this, on the coasts outside of New York and San Francisco, I have a dear colleague who recently passed, Dr. Sunya Luthar. Some may recognize her name. Dr. Luthar had for years looked at teens in very low-resourced communities, usually in the inner city, and looked at the rates of addiction and struggle and depression, and simply as a control group, came out to a highly resourced community, looked at the same diagnoses, and to her shock at the time, in highly resourced communities here in Fairfield County, Marin, places well-resourced communities found higher rates of addiction, higher rates of anxiety and depression and suicide in highly resourced communities than in the inner city. And the field at the time, and it was all over the newspaper, how could this be? Most parents truly love our children. They have every opportunity in front of them. How is it that there's such inner suffering amidst such outer resources? So Dr. Luthar was very clever. She went right in to where the students live. She sat down in the dining hall of highly resourced, large, excellent public high schools. Sat right down and said, hey, who here is really popular? And everyone knew, oh, that group of girls, they're super popular. Those boys are super popular. Dr. Luthar came back 2 weeks later, sat at a different lunch table, because everyone was at the same ones, and said, can you tell me about that group of girls, those boys? And in this way, was able to determine the lived behavioral correlates of social esteem. What is in the air and water of our culture? So what might you imagine was the #1 predictor in girls for popularity? It was absolutely in the bandwidth of physical appearance, and quite specifically, the number one predictor of popularity in girls in highly resourced communities is weight. Parts and pieces. A public square minus a spiritual core. A public square silent on the deeper nature of who we are. And the number two predictor? Mean Girls, like the movie and the musical. Interpersonal aggression to instantiate rank. So these are beautiful souls on earth acculturated in a tidal wave. A public square brought into the school minus the spiritual core. What about boys? Number one predictor of popularity in boys in highly resourced communities. So athletics indeed is in the broad picture, but the number one predictor was substance use. The popular boys used drugs, and the number two predictor was not intimacy, but notches on the belt, exploitation of partners. Again, beautiful souls acculturated here. These are transactional relationships. These are relationships minus a deep felt connection of the sanctity of who we are to one another. With or without religion, a deep felt reverence of who we are to one another. And how do we help our children move out of transactional relationships? You know, what do you look like? And what can you do for me? And how good are you at this, that, or the other? Into, I'm here to be your friend, to encourage you, to walk by your side. On a tough day, we must forgive each other. Transformational. We're here to discover life together. That is another way of being. And what the hope written into the science shows us is that high school, from middle adolescence, really puberty, to middle adolescence, late adolescence, into emerging adulthood, there's an opportunity of our kids' lifetime. There is a surge. We mark this in science through longitudinal twin studies that identify an increase in the heritable contribution of 50%, which means a surge from the inside out. And what does that experience feel like? What is my purpose? What is my meaning? And I don't mean, am I going to be a teacher or a lawyer? I mean my ultimate purpose. And what is the nature of reality? Everything you told me, mom, dad, pastor, priest, imam, is there meaning written into life? Remember the tidal wave. As this struggle is going on for ultimate meaning, my place in the universe, there is a latent, radical materialism, by which I don't just mean being materialistic, the idea that life does not have meaning. There's an evisceration of meaning latent in our culture, a public square minus the spiritual core. And the teen searches, and the young adult searches, what is the nature of life, and me in it. When we show up to walk by their side, to hear them out, to tell our stories in the first person in this dogged hunt for ultimate meaning. We are walking them through the hardwired process of spiritual emergence, spiritual individuation, the seeking of truth against my inner compass. Adolescents are exquisitely good at this. They cannot bear phoniness. You know, Mom, why is it at our house of worship that's all the rich people who sit by the door, not the teachers? Right? Mom, why is it, they are blunt, right? You think you're X, but really you're Y, Mom, right? This is a gift. The dogged pursuit of truth. When we support spiritual emergence, it is the most important work our children do. As this booting up, this augmented capacity expands, it can often feel like a half-empty glass of spirituality. What is my meaning and purpose? I don't know. And after interviewing hundreds of adolescents, we often hear it's when I don't let myself think about it that I get most depressed. And these interviews and these 10 years of deep engagements are true across culture and faith tradition. There's one spiritual brain, and we all have it. And as in any innate human capacity, there's a hardwired trajectory, just as we have a growth spurt between 9th and 11th grade, just as we go gray at 40 or 50, just as we become metacognitive as teens. There is a growth spurt in the teen, ready or not. Most traditions have marked this: bar and bat mitzvah, fellowship, the anipi, the sweat lodge. The developmental struggles are marked as depressions, the existential ennui. But only in about 1 case out of 3 or 4 is it actually pathology. Developmental depression is the coming of age, the dogged hunt for ultimate purpose, known through the head and felt in the heart, quest. Developmental depression is how we form the red brain, the spiritual core, the seat of transcendent relationship. And when we do, amidst the pandemic of depression, addiction, and even suicide, and knowing that we are at ground zero in a highly resourced community, there is nothing as protective against the diseases of despair. A teen who's a sophomore, a junior, a college sophomore, I turn to God for guidance in times of difficulty. When I have a tough decision to make, I ask, what really is my higher power showing me? My family is sacred. Nature is a spiritual home. Daily spiritual awareness. That teen who's a standard deviation above as compared to below the mean in that awareness, this teen saying, I don't know what you're talking about, is at 80% decreased relative risk of addiction using DSM criteria, going through the window of risk for lifetime course of addiction, the trailhead. 70% less likely to drive 90 miles an hour, jump out the second-story window at a party. And in a meta-analysis, so you round up all good studies, 2,000 tragically completed suicides and 5,000 matched controls, there was an 82% decreased relative risk of completed suicide when spiritual life is shared. Pause and purpose, faith, family, sangha, minyan, a way of being to one another. As parents and grandparents, we can take back our culture. We can stop saying, oh, so where are they going to college, right? And instead say, tell me the funniest story in your house from this week. Right? We can stop saying, so how often is it that you go to the SAT tutor? Or, how many sports you, and instead say, from achieving awareness, I love the way your child laughs so loud that everyone else starts laughing too. Right? We can get back in the mix of life. We set our culture. Civil society is made by us. No one's going to do it for us. It's not done on TV. It's certainly not done by politicians. It's done by us. So when we strengthen the spiritual core in our lives and in our community, there's a different outcome. Let's get back to Singer Luther's study. I teamed up with Singer Luther. In the schools that we've just described, highly resourced, outside of urban areas, what might you imagine is the rate at which a young person, a teenager, high school student says, my personal spiritual life is highly important to me, in whatever language, beautiful pluralistic expression that may be. I turn to God for guidance. Jesus walks by my side. I feel this force in and through nature. I know I'm never alone. My grandma walks with me, whatever that transcendent awareness may be. The national rate is 70%. We are innately spiritual beings, and this burgeons in adolescence. Any guesses? It is down in highly resourced communities, and the culture entrained in that. It is under 40%, yes. It is 15%, less than a quarter of the national rate, 15%, which means 85% of our high school students do not benefit from the greatest protective resource that is our birthright. They were born with it, 1/3 innate. 85% of our teens suffer more than the national average, and we have the antidote. If I told you there were a little pill, here it is, and you can give it to your kids, and they will be at 80% decreased relative risk for addiction, and we're in a pandemic, a post-industrial global pandemic of suicide. You give this to your kids, and they're 4/5 protected. There's nothing like that. I mean, if the FDA, 80% protected, normally if something's 20% protective, we're lining up to buy it. The supplements are 20%, 80% protective. This is our birthright. This is who we are. And it's very rarely by picking up a book at 20 or 30 that we realize our innate spiritual core. What we know through now decades of science is that the 2/3 embrace is held in the ambassadorship of our parents and grandparents. It is in the communities that we create that intentionally breathe in a foundational spiritual presence to our lives. It is in our faith communities. It is in nature. It is in all the places where the deep, true nature of who we are is realized. How are we on time? Are we done, or can I do a little more?
More.
A little more? Okay. Okay. Thank you. So there's a very droning narrative, and it goes like this. Things are so bad. The world has these problems. It's never been worse out there. Okay? So my grandparents, well, I had one uncle who performed surgeries on the beaches of Normandy and watched a lot of young people die. We lost a lot of second and third cousins in the Holocaust. My grandparents went through the Great Depression. It is not my impression that things have never been so bad outwardly. I think there is this fragility of inner being which experiences things as being so overwhelming. And this has to do with the tidal wave. There is a way of fortifying ourselves and our children to look into life in a far more full and abundant and resilient way. Here, following what was experienced as a collective trauma of COVID, right, and the social correlates of that, the lockdowns, here we have 3,000 plus vets, all of whom were traumatized in war and are physically injured. And what you noticed amongst these 3,000 vets is that as we go out, the x-axis, everyone here has PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. There is more and more and more and more trauma. Okay? More trauma, more trauma. Up the x-axis, more trauma, more growth. More growth. More trauma, more trauma, more growth. More trauma, more growth. Trauma is a gateway for growth until we get so far out the curve that we need support to grow. We are built normatively with an innate spiritual brain, and trauma, not getting what I want, the worst of the worst, the thing I couldn't believe, is actually a cracking open, is the gateway to growth, post-traumatic growth. Sy and colleagues studied this, 3,000 plus vets. How do I help my kid get up on that curve? Tedeschi and colleagues came up with the 4 predictors we can cultivate in ourselves and help build through our practices and support for one another. Access to the very experience, putting it in words, sharing it in a group, and then shining the light of spiritual awareness onto that very experience, through which is then a profound rearrangement of meaning. Suddenly I saw that we both could be forgiven. Then I knew God had been with me all along. Suddenly it was clear that I was not to blame. The deeper rearrangement of meaning, often very sudden, that speaks to a wiser part of ourselves, is post-traumatic spiritual growth. In this way, it is not through trauma that we might simply recover, but that we might grow larger inside, that we might actually be renewed. A spiritual response to suffering. And it's the same red brain through which we walk through the knock at the door of developmental depression into a deeper awakening. So let's get back to Signe Luther's sample. 15% of young people, of high school students in highly resourced communities have a strong spiritual core and gain these benefits. How do I get my kid into that 15%? Almost without exception, their families were either part of faith communities or communities of great purpose. A community where I show up and I am loved simply as a soul on earth, simply for being. Let's look, I have 3 minutes, at life with and without a spiritual core. Here's life with a spiritual core, here's life without a spiritual core. We'll look at the first of 3 bridges, coming of age, but this applies equally at the second bridge of spiritual growth, midlife, and the third, elderhood. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? I, at the first bridge, I am the one that made varsity tennis as a sophomore. Actually, I am the one who was cut as a senior. Who am I? I am the one that took 7 APs. Actually, I am the one that didn't get into one college. I am my outward performance, my parts, my pieces, #1 predictor of popularity in girls. Right? Well, that's a fragile proposition. Because say I'm the very smartest one. I got 7 APs and I'm off to Caltech and super smart, and I get out there and suddenly I'm not in the top 2%. In fact, I'm not even in the top 20%. I am in the bottom quarter. Okay, that's not just disappointing. That is existentially annihilating. Okay? Let's tell it another way. Who am I? Well, I might be oh so smart or oh so strong, but that is not who I am. Who am I? I'm a soul on earth. I'm a child of God. I'm a being of infinite worth. I'm an emanation like rays from the sun of source. What is it to be oh so smart or oh so strong? Those are capacities, endowments, through which I might carve my calling, my purpose, my contribution. But it's not who I am. Same story, 7 APs, off to Caltech, I get there, I'm in the bottom quarter, and I say, ooh, that's disappointing. But that's not who I am. I'm a soul on earth. I'm a child of God. And this math ability, well, it is my calling to someday clean the water or connect people or create new education. So today's failure or setback, that's just noise on the trajectory. And if I'm a soul on earth, you're a soul on earth. And our relationship is about interest, it's about commitment. On a tough day, it is about forgiveness. But what it's not about is, oh, you got the 97 and I got the 82. You're going to go to NYU Med School and I'm not. Oh, he asked you out and not me. It is not about narrow comparison. That is coming of age when we support the spiritual core. And if it is established in this highly formative window, a stance of a spiritual response to life's red doors and yellow doors, it is there at midlife. It is there at midlife. We've all seen things in the paper. A fellow in a neighboring town lost his money, closed the garage door, and ran the engine because he didn't have money. Who am I? I am a soul on earth. I am a child of God. That's part of the quest. That's actually part of the journey. So just as we might ask, what is my ultimate meaning and purpose in relationship to source, to the highest source? At midlife, the second bridge, we might ask, how have I fulfilled my ultimate sacred meaning and purpose? What is my spiritual footprint? What kind of parent am I being? And in the third bridge, as an elder, what do I need to clean up? And anyone I now see could have been my child, and perhaps is. These bridges of deep spiritual growth are the opportunities of our lifetime, and the ignition is often the struggle of existential despair. So the next time you hear a knock at the door, and everything looked fine yesterday, and to now everything's a mess today, maybe it is an opportunity, a welcome mat, to inherit the next mantle of your life. It is a slamming red door so that you can walk through the numinous journey of the sacred quest. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, everyone, I'm sure there is lots of questions out there. We just asked if you have a question, if you don't mind coming up to the mic so we could hear you. But we're going to open up our floor, Lisa, if you don't mind, to take a few
Wonderful.
questions
Thank
from our
you.
audience.
That's
So
great.
feel free to come on up. Okay, someone has to go first. Come on, y'all. Thank you.
Hi, my name is also Lisa. I live in Weston. I she's good, a teen daughter who has been through a lot of this in the last couple of years. She had 3 times at Silver Hill Hospital, horrible depression. She had been a gymnast, and during COVID, got COVID and never went back to it, and she felt she had lost her identity. I'm Catholic. I go to church regularly, but my husband does not. And even though I tried to get my children to kind of come with me, they've just all kind of fallen away from it. And one of the things I always felt was that one of the things my daughter had lost was that belief that she was more than her capabilities, that she was special, that she was somebody important. I can't figure out how to get this back to her. Everything you said is so true. It's so important. But she's 16 now. She's back at high school. She's doing well. She was on the volleyball team for 2 years and got cut this year. Same kind of thing. And she's finding her way. She's in a good place, a much better place than she was the last couple of years. But I've got a younger daughter who has her struggles. I've got a son who just went off to college. He's having trouble finding friends, which is totally normal and natural. It's just it's like sitting here is so great, but we're all open to hearing this information. We showed up today because we already believe this. What do you say to a young person who is lost, who is in that, isn't part of that 15%, is part of that 85% who doesn't have that knowledge of themselves, and how do we incorporate these ideas in our daily life to bring that to them?
Thank you. Thank you. It's a very generous sharing, and we really appreciate you. As parents, we're watched. We are watched. The littlest things, we are watched. And so we have the opportunity to tell our stories of our spiritual path in the first person. So I might say to my college-age daughters, I remember when I was 19, and somewhere, well, I'll tell you the story that I tell them. This is an example, our stories of our spiritual path. I was 19, and I fell in love, and I couldn't believe it. I'd never fallen in love before. And after 3 months, he said he loved me. Like, you love me? Ah. And then after 5 months, he broke up with me. I'm like, well, how could you have broken up with me? Because you said you loved me. I mean, I thought he was so handsome, and I thought he was so brilliant, and you broke up with me? My mother loves me, and she still loves me. You said you loved me, and now you don't love me? I don't understand it. And so I started thinking, well then, remember the surge, the hardwired surge of seeking truth. Wait a minute, is love permanent? No. Is love real? Well, if it's not permanent, is it real? And actually, is anything real? Like, is this guy real? And am I real? And what is real? And I went on a huge existential dig. Remember, the surge of the quest. And in this process, I started for the first time in a culture, like 90% of non-religious universities, of radical nihilism that eviscerates the meaning that is actually, in my view, written into life, that eviscerates forms of knowing, such as intuition and mysticism, favoring only some forms of knowing. I started to think, wait a minute, what if God doesn't exist? What if God doesn't exist? In fact, what if there is no meaning? And if you really take that seriously, that life has no meaning, and if you really, that's a bitter pill. So much so that I got more and more depressed. So I went to a therapist, went to the college counselor, and I said, It started because I just broke up with my boyfriend, but now I really don't know if God exists, and I don't know if life has any meaning. And the very well-intentioned counselor said, well, was there another man in your life at some point that didn't think there was meaning? Were you happy as a child? Did your father pay attention to you? And I said, my dad adored me. I want to know if there's meaning in life. And I moved on to the next therapist, who was a cognitive behavioral therapist. And I said the same thing. I don't know if there's meaning in life. I don't know if God exists. And the well-meaning cognitive therapist said, do you feel some sense of self-criticism? How do you talk to yourself? Do you have self-doubt? And I said, actually, I'm embarrassed to say I feel just fine about myself. I want to know if God exists and if there's any point in life. And this went deeper and deeper to the point where I was literally hanging out in the basement of my dorm in the freezing February to be near the hot water heater. It was so traumatizing that life might not have meaning. Until that summer, we're standing by the water. I saw light on the water and knew, the deeper, wiser part of myself, of course God exists. That's my words, you have your own. There is a quest for the deep, transcendent, loving relationship through which we're loved and held, guided, and never alone. Every one of us is built to know and feel that. And yet the tidal wave of culture, including in the implicit teachings of our most universities, is radically eviscerating of life's most sacred meaning, that which is knit into life. I went to philosophy classes, I went to world religion classes, and we all studied about it. When I share this story with my teenage college children, they know we talk about this here. They know it's real. They know that I had doubts as they might have doubts, but that on the other side, I was sure 100% in my deepest form of an inner knowing that we are in relationship to the sacred, transcendent, the highest power. So that's the type of story in my journey. Whatever our stories are, and in the moment of my greatest struggle, I turned to God and suddenly I just knew things in my deepest heart would be okay. That type of story. If you pray out loud, if you say, I'm going to meditate, do you want to sit by my side? If you say, hey, I'm coming to our house of worship, and whether or not you're really game, will you sit with me? Okay. When we walk the walk of our own spiritual path, and then narrate it, talk the walk of our own spiritual path, science has shown those are the two dimensions that most shape the spiritual core. The two-thirds embrace that shapes the spiritual core. So we are ambassadors. Now, you've handled very beautifully and honestly the challenge that in our world, this beautiful world where we're all coming together, we often come from different faith traditions, or one person feels deeply connected and one doesn't. We have the inborn authority to speak our own spiritual truth and let our partner speak their spiritual truth. So to a grandparent can speak his or her spiritual truth in the first person. We don't need to be identical twins in the expression of our spiritual core. When we threw religion out of the public square, not only did we throw the spiritual baby out with the bathwater, we lost our greatest American gift, which is pluralism. So we've grown up, we have diversity and inclusion around race and gender and orientation. The heel strike, our next step, is inclusivity around spiritual diversity. To speak openly, I want to hear about Diwali and Ramadan and Christmas and Hanukkah. I want to know you in the deepest way. So as parents, we can walk the walk and talk the walk, but we can also choose to be in community. Who hangs out in our kitchen? Which parents and kids? And when they're there, it's our house. How do we talk here? So we have an enormous impact. And if you have been living your truth and praying out loud and worshiping your way, I guarantee you that that was noted. One last comment. So I'm Jewish, we light Shabbat candles, and the majority of the time, 2 of my 3 children sit there silently, like this. And then in the morning, each morning, I make a prayer, and it's a very big thing, and I go outside, and I'm by the river, and I say, thank you, God, for sun and air and earth and water and trees and birds and all living beings here and beyond. And then after that, and for our family, and I name each person, and may you please open my heart that I might be present to your great love, to let your great love come through me. So I do my whole prayer, and she's looking at me and then walks away. So my teenage daughter goes off on a class trip. They're taking pictures. A friend catches her, and there she is, far away on the other side of the world, raising her hands. It got in. Other thoughts?
I'm Christina. Nice to see you. The anecdotes that you just shared about your own journey turning to clinical mental health care to deal with an existential crisis.
Yes.
That's really tricky. I went through a similar experience, and I see that as one of the major challenges in a society that's kind of bereft, and so we look at it all as depression and therefore a mental health challenge. When you think about who can help along this journey, and beyond like us as parents or having communities around us, what are the interesting answers you're seeing out there in terms of, supporters, whether it's like spiritual direction or even therapists who are more spiritually aware? So curious about that. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes. So increasingly, there are more and more therapists who are spiritually grounded psychotherapists. And in fact, at Columbia, I started the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute. We've trained hundreds of people, Lydia is one of them, in foundationally spiritually grounded psychological work. Now, there's two models. One is a spiritually oriented psychotherapist, which I think of as a swirl cake, right? Spirituality and psychology mixed together, like vanilla and chocolate mixed together in a marble cake. The other model is a layer cake, where some people want to see just a classic, traditionally trained therapist and partner and seek counsel and even build a team with the clergy of their own faith tradition. And in our country, it breaks out about half and half, and it is, of course, the choice of the client. I have seen spiritual parenting groups. I have seen them within houses of worship and formed by parents in their living rooms. I have seen both within religion and outside of religion, spiritual support groups, moms groups, dads groups. Why do we wait for people to bottom out in AA to come together and say, I've got to hand it over? Right? Only once I'm traumatized, only once I've bottomed out, I've got to hand it over. We are built to be in a sustained, transcendent relationship every day of our lives. So how wonderful that AA or NI might be a turning point where we realize our nature. And in fact, AA and NA are so tremendously successful because we are made whole. 2/3 of people in AA and NA awaken spiritually, half of them through chipping away at it and half spontaneously. We are made whole. We can make ourselves whole in community or in our own journey. And I think some of both can be very, very wonderful. Yeah. Does that start to answer your question? Yeah. I will say that spiritually grounded youth groups are wonderful. We looked for years, we interviewed teens across all different faith traditions, very, very diverse culturally and religiously, and no matter where we went, 82% less likely to take our lives when spiritual life is shared, where we walk in and we're seen as a soul on earth. It doesn't matter if I just got dinged at 10 colleges or if I'm going to Caltech. I'm looked at as a soul on earth. It doesn't matter if my dad just made $50 million or he's going to jail. I love you, welcome. Soul on earth. Right? So that deep, radical love is something that can be fostered in a foundationally spiritual youth group, irrespective across traditions, and it can be made outside of traditions. Because remember, the 15% in Dr. Luther's studies, which included Fairfield County, who had a strong spiritual core, were part of families that were either part of a faith community or were part of a community of contribution. Habitat for Humanity, Doctors Without Borders, relational spirituality. So how do I get my kid in the 15% despite the tidal wave? A community that is a foundationally, spiritually minded community. Not just like a nice community or a spiritually grounded community within a faith tradition or one of service. Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Dr. Miller. And she's so graciously agreed to come and do some book signing. The library has gotten some books for purchase, so if you want to, we'll invite her to come down. She'll take a seat at the table and sign some books and be able to chat with you all. If this is just the beginning of this conversation, which we hope that it is, my name is Jen. I'm the studio director over at Pause and Purpose with Emily and our team. And we invite you to come to our member event next Thursday. Dr. Miller is going to do an intimate, deeper dive into her book and some meditation practices and a private Q&A with us. So if you are a member of our studio, we welcome you to come tomorrow, Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. If you're not yet a member, I'll stay back later. Feel free to come chat with me about her or anyone of our team. We'd love to have you in our studio. So thank you again, Dr. Miller.
Thank you for a wonderful time to connect. I really am grateful to you.
And we invite you down to have a seat at our table. If you brought your own book, feel free to stop at the table, or you can grab a copy here to take with you tonight. So we hope you all enjoyed our program, and we'll see you hopefully on Thursday.